sobre los temas de competitividad. Y hoy justamente en este sector estamos viendo sobre todo los temas de innovación tecnológica, pues que si hablamos de competitividad tenemos que hablar de tecnología. Y me está ayudando mucho para ver el panorama de ver lo que están haciendo otras ciudades y lo que podemos llegar a aplicar también nosotros en México.
The hub on the transfer and commercialization of technology is connecting and strengthening national innovation ecosystems in the region. Each edition of the hub trains budding technology entrepreneurs from the region's public and private sectors to take promising products and services from idea to market.
Porque es importante que estemos juntos en esto, porque la región tiene que estar unida y me parece que hay mucho conocimiento en la región que todavía no está explotado comercialmente como podría ser, y esta es la mejor manera de hacerlo.
Tenemos la proyección de cada año generar y compartir nuevas experiencias entre aquellos que contribuyen a la innovación. Queremos cambiar el cómo lo hemos estado haciendo en Latinoamérica. Queremos generar la unión de los países, queremos colaborar.
Our virtual platform on technology foresight, Prospecta Americas, will support OAS member states in identifying and mapping future trends and technological development of critical importance for the Americas.
Este esfuerzo, el cual viene siendo apoyado por la Organización de los Estados Americanos, nos permitirá tener una gran información para poder mapear estas iniciativas de innovación y poder que ellas contribuyan al crecimiento económico, a la competitividad y al bienestar de nuestras naciones.
Como bien sabemos, nos encontramos ya en la cuarta revolución industrial, la que está cambiando rápidamente la forma en que se hace negocios, se produce, se consume y se genera bienestar y entretenimiento en el mundo. Es la mayor amenaza, tal vez la mejor oportunidad que tenemos en nuestras naciones.
The Inter-American Teacher Education Network, the I-10, is working to improve the quality of teachers with an emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. In 2019, the I-10 launched the first STEM Teacher Fellowship of the Americas. The Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas, ECPA, is working with governments in the Caribbean to advance electric mobility and clean transport as the sub-region pursues energy independence. Under our Integrated Water Resources Management Program, SETI is responding to the demand of member states for platforms and applications that enable data-driven policies. In the Central American region, for example, we are expanding the scope of Costa Rica's Plataforma Interactiva de Aplicación del Clima Tropical. This tool captures and disseminates real-time climate and water data, promoting resilient agriculture. The Inter-American Committee on Ports is building human and institutional capacity through public-private partnerships to address port modernization, logistics, and security. CooperaNet, SETI's multi-stakeholder platform for cooperation and partnerships, is being relaunched in 2019, responding to member states' call for a more robust hub for cooperation. In a region where 8 out of 10 consumers begin or end their shopping process online, SETI has entered into a partnership with the private sector.
Es una herramienta que sin duda acerca a las MIPYMES hacia la demanda que hoy está migrando a Internet, y con eso pretendemos mejorar las ventas y el posicionamiento de las empresas pequeñas.
As we look to the future, the Executive Secretariat for Integral Development will continue to leverage cooperation and partnerships to expand our reach, proving that together we are much more than the sum of our 34 member states.
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
Y allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno, y lo dieron todo lo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras se aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children and they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
SETI's results for 2018 proves our effectiveness as a development partner, placing people at the center of our work and leveraging partnerships and cooperation to transform policy imperatives into action. With an eye on the rapidly changing global context, SETI is innovating to constructively address the emerging challenges and opportunities for the region. As part of our competitiveness program, SETI is designing precise tools to assess assets and capabilities in the productive sector to determine paths towards higher value goods and services. As our flagship program for partnerships, the Americas Competitiveness Exchange on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, VACE, will continue to leverage good practices and the power of networks to increase trade and investment in the region.
For us, the role of the OAS is very important, connecting countries, connecting governments and private sector, and letting us know what other countries are doing it and how we can replicate that in our countries to enhance development.
For me, who has come here to look at how can we develop our own ecosystem, our own innovation hubs, our own accelerators, I think seeing this, touching, feeling, seeing the transformation, seeing how quickly you've made it happen is a testament to what is possible. So I believe all of us leave here stronger than ever.
The Working Group of Experts on Subnational Competitiveness, the GTEX, is our gateway program to promote local economic competitiveness policies alongside municipal and state-level governments, together with the private sector and academia.
Este tipo de reuniones te sirven para darte cuenta de todo lo que se está viviendo en América Latina sobre los temas de competitividad. Y hoy justamente en este sector estamos viendo sobre todo los temas de innovación tecnológica. Pues que si hablamos de competitividad tenemos que hablar de tecnología. Y me está ayudando mucho para ver el panorama de ver lo que están haciendo otras ciudades y lo que podemos llegar a aplicar también nosotros en México.
The Hub on the Transfer and Commercialization of Technology is connecting and strengthening national innovation ecosystems in the region. Each edition of the Hub trains budding technology entrepreneurs from the region's public and private sectors to take promising products and services from idea to market.
Porque es importante que estemos juntos en esto, porque la región tiene que estar unida y me parece que hay mucho conocimiento en la región que todavía no está explotado comercialmente como podría ser, y esta es la mejor manera de hacerlo.
Tenemos la proyección de cada año generar y compartir nuevas experiencias entre aquellos que contribuyen a la innovación. Queremos cambiar el cómo lo hemos estado haciendo en Latinoamérica. Queremos generar la unión de los países, queremos colaborar.
Our virtual platform on technology foresight, Prospecta Americas, will support OAS member states in identifying and mapping future trends and technological development of critical importance for the Americas.
Este esfuerzo, el cual viene siendo apoyado por la Organización de los Estados Americanos, nos permitirá tener una gran información para poder mapear estas iniciativas de innovación y poder que ellas contribuyan al crecimiento económico, a la competitividad y al bienestar de nuestras naciones.
Como bien sabemos, nos encontramos ya en la cuarta revolución industrial, la que está cambiando rápidamente la forma en que se hace negocios, se produce, se consume y se genera bienestar y entretenimiento en el mundo. Es la mayor amenaza, tal vez la mejor oportunidad que tenemos en nuestras naciones.
The Inter-American Teacher Education Network, the I-10, is working to improve the quality of teachers with an emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. In 2019, the I-10 launched the first STEM Teacher Fellowship of the Americas. The Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas, ECPA, is working with governments in the Caribbean to advance electric mobility and clean transport as the sub-region pursues energy independence. Under our Integrated Water Resources Management Program, SETI is responding to the demand of member states for platforms and applications that enable data-driven policies. In the Central American region, for example, we are expanding the scope of Costa Rica's Plataforma Interactiva de Aplicación del Clima Tropical. This tool captures and disseminates real-time climate and water data, promoting resilient agriculture. The Inter-American Committee on Ports is building human and institutional capacity through public-private partnerships to address port modernization, logistics, and security. CooperaNet, SETI's multi-stakeholder platform for cooperation and partnerships, is being relaunched in 2019, responding to member states' call for a more robust hub for cooperation. In a region where 8 out of 10 consumers begin or end their shopping process online, SETI has entered into a partnership with the private sector
Es una herramienta que sin duda acerca a las MIPYMES hacia la demanda que hoy está migrando a Internet, y con eso pretendemos mejorar las ventas y el posicionamiento de las empresas pequeñas.
As we look to the future, the Executive Secretariat for Integral Development will continue to leverage cooperation and partnerships to expand our reach, proving that together we are much more than the sum of our 34 member states.
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OAS, y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno, y lo dieron todo lo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras se aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
Las pruebas esta mañana.
Perfecto.
En el estado tenemos Antigua y Barbuda, Argentina, Bahamas, Belice, Brasil, Canadá, Chile, Colombia, Dominica, Ecuador, El Salvador, Estados Unidos, Grenada, Guatemala, Guyana, Honduras, México, Nicaragua, Panamá, Paraguay, República Dominicana, Santa Lucía, San Vicente y las Grenadinas, Trinidad y Tobago, Uruguay y Venezuela. Tenemos quórum, señor presidente. Gracias.
Muy bien. Buenos días a todos. Su Excelencia Marta Lucía Ramírez, vicepresidenta.
Good morning to everyone. Your Excellency Marta Lucía Ramírez, Vice President and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Colombia, Madam Ambassador, Mr. and Mrs. Ambassadors, permanent and alternate representatives, Mr. Luis Almagro, Ambassador Nestor Mendez, ladies and gentlemen, and officials of the General Secretariat. I call to order the present extraordinary session, virtual session of the Permanent Council that has been convened at the request of the Permanent Mission of Colombia, according to document CPINF 9003/21, for the purpose of hosting Her Excellency Marta Lucía Ramírez, Vice President and Minister of Foreign Affairs. We know that she has a tight schedule, so we thank her very much for her willingness to participate. In this regard, and since there are no comments, we will approve the agenda for the session, document CPOD 23721/21. No objection, approved.
Para introducir la...
Allow me just briefly to introduce the Vice President and Minister of Foreign Affairs. She has a stellar background in business, in security, democracy, governance, and regional developments. Her public career is very, very broad and extensive. She was Minister of Commerce. She has worked on issues that we know a great deal about, and certainly about which we must continue learning. I'm talking about security, about employment, and something as substantive as possible for these days. Since the 7th of August 2018, she became the first woman ever in the history of Colombia to become Vice President of the Republic. And that certainly is a sign of the times. Let me also express to our good friend our warm wish and our regret at the attempt on the life of the President Ivan Duque. There are no words, truly, to express how deeply moved and shocked we were by that attempt on the President's life. And so, without further ado, Madam Vice President and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Colombia, you have the floor. Thank you very much. I'd like to greet the Secretary General and certainly you, sir, as chair of the Permanent Council of the OAS, Ambassador for Uruguay. You are always so gracious, and Uruguay and Colombia, of course, have always had very tight links. And we much appreciate your kind words of regret with regard to that attempt on the president's life just a week ago, as it happens. And I had started to say to our very dear friend, the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro, and the Assistant Secretary General, to the permanent representatives, the ambassadors, the observers. Let me also, of course, salute Alejandro Ordóñez, our own ambassador, permanent representative for Colombia at the OAS, and indeed all who are listening to us today. We send you our warmest greetings. It is an honor as Vice President of Colombia and now also as Minister of Foreign Affairs of my country, representing the government of President Iván Duque, but more than that, representing every Colombian citizen. I extend to you on all of our behalves this warm and cordial and most sincere greeting. This has been a very hard year. A year plus 3 months, and some of us have lost beloved members of our friends, of our family. There are millions of families who are not as complete as they were not long ago. An empty seat at the table, someone missing. Now, we are learning, I think, through this, that we are never safe. We can never cease expecting the unexpected. And humanity, of course, can suffer all kinds of catastrophes through health crises and indeed through climate change, and the two might be linked. So as we, all of us, put our heads together to think about what we need to go do moving forward in this hemisphere, I urge you to show that solidarity and that we should stick together. We are with you. We are one. Colombia has asked for this special session to reiterate our commitment to the Organization of American States. We believe in the American system, not only for democracy, but for the promotion and protection of human rights in our hemisphere, particularly so at this extraordinarily difficult juncture for this region, indeed for the world at large. The OAS has an enormous commitment, and it asks that we remain committed with it so that all of us together, we can make this organization ever more effective as well as efficient and attentive to the hopes, the needs, the aspirations of so many hundreds of millions in this hemisphere who deserve better, who aspire to a better way of life. That is what we hope, and which is, as we know, the very basis of peace and of concord. The world is rocked by uncertainty, and we have no certainty, exactly, none, with regard to how this pandemic will evolve. How many more jobs will we lose? How much more wealth will be lost? Indeed, as I started out saying, how many more lives will be lost? And so pessimism is not surprising. It is rife in many countries in the world and certainly in our own beloved Americas. We too are going through a tough time in Colombia and doing our very best to face up to these terrible challenges with a better economic growth. But what we want, of course, is growth that will reduce poverty. And Colombia's main aim over the last 2 decades, by the way, has been just that. We have really managed quite significant progress in economic and social areas. We have very much boosted our social investment, our rural economies, and that's why our growth rates and our employment rates and increasing employment is what up to now had been very positive. Need I tell you, things have changed radically with the pandemic, And it is thanks to the economic policies that had been generating sustained growth that we were able to buffer this crisis as best as possible. And Ivan Duque, our president, with enormous leadership and a great sense of commitment, adopted hand in hand with our Ministry of Treasury very important policies such that we could offer immediate responses to so many people who were in their homes, who found themselves in very precarious living conditions, some with no income at all. And so it was an absolute emergency that we do something to alleviate that crisis that so many were undergoing. We have done a lot in reducing extreme poverty and multidimensional poverty. In December of 2019, extreme poverty and multidimensional poverty had both dropped very significantly. Extreme was about 9.6%, extreme poverty was. And that is why we keep saying we are absolutely committed to the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. And what we want is for there to be no further extreme poverty by 2030. So we're not complacent with that figure that I've mentioned, the 8.6%. We want to be done with extreme poverty by 2030, and we are working hard in that direction. Our social security system has been broadened, has been strengthened. We now have universal coverage, practically 95.2%. of our Colombian population is covered by Social Security, and there is advantage. There are very great progress made in education. We have had the greatest amount of money earmarked for education, and that has become the #1 priority at that level. Protection, promotion and protection of human rights, as I said at the outset, we understand are very linked to everything. But, you know, without education or sufficient education, without sufficient employment, how can we seriously, with a straight face, talk about doing what we need to do in human rights? The one goes with the other. It's a sine qua non. And that is why we see this as absolutely one and the same. We're not only looking at reducing the mortality rate. We've had the lowest homicide rate this last year than over the last 40. This has represented an enormous effort. As you know, we have reduced the acreage that is devoted to cocaine. And when the peace process was launched, we were right there, step by step. And we kept asking that that agreement be tough, be demanding, and allow us to finally end the drug business in Colombia, because we understood very well how much the drug trafficking, I mean, this is a no-brainer. Drug trafficking and violence go hand in hand. And this was an absolute cancer in our society, which affected democracy inevitably. And for that reason and all the other reasons, where we have seen indicators, we always wondered, okay, that's good, but how do we trounce the drug trafficking business? We have done a lot. We are doing pretty well, eliminating the acreage devoted to the growing of the coca leaf. But in these present circumstances, ladies and gentlemen, we obviously need to understand that this is a truism. These are not normal times. And I'm sure that all of you share this in greater or lesser degree. But in Colombia, let me simply say that when we talk about human rights, we understand that there has to be a permanent commitment to the multidimensional aspect of human rights that, as I mentioned earlier, are absolutely embedded in our constant defense of democracy, constantly focused on security and the defense of our citizens' lives. And today, of course, everything that is the substrate of integral development, comprehensive development, that indeed goes to a dignified and a decent life. For us, the Charter The democratic charter of the OAS is absolutely essential, as was, of course, at the outset, the charter of the organization itself, needless to say. What I wish to share with you is that we are facing enormous challenges from people who are dead set against democracy. But it won't happen. We are committed to our institutional challenges, but let me just say bluntly, and that's why I'm here, more than ever, we call on every nation in the hemisphere, every one of these institutions that are pillars of our development, to stand firm with us. We must respond to all of these attacks on the rule of law. We're talking about the rule of law. We're talking about what is in fact the bedrock of democracy, and we cannot allow some to go for their own particular winning scenario in order to destroy the institutional strength of our democracy. This country has worked unstintingly to strengthen our democracy, to find a balance among the different branches of government, and to sustain the inalienable rights of every citizen. That's why the rules that determine the participation of citizens in the democratic life, as set forth in the Inter-American Charter, talks about free and fair elections, universal suffrage. Be assured that Colombia will never allow for those sacrosanct principles to be trampled. This, of course, goes to every democracy in the hemisphere, and I believe that we need all of us to stand firm and to be seen to stand firm in order to ensure that these commitments at the hemispheric level remain solid, not only in this hemisphere, but to be seen in the world as the solid Latin American oneness that we reflect here. Again, we recognize that the pandemic has impacted all of us. Colombia, certainly, not least. Every day, we have been receiving the teeming hordes of miserable and beleaguered Venezuelan citizens who pour into our borders. Transnational crime, drug and otherwise, is rife. Armed groups that are everywhere and that have remained in that sister republic with which we share borders. And needless to say, at those border areas, this represents an enormous danger, not just for Colombia, but to the entire hemisphere, be assured. It is that. And in the case of Colombia, I will say that a good number of our members who have been demobilized in the FARC, but we know that, again, the drug trafficking remains an ongoing challenge, and very often has killed people in many parts of the country, especially in the border areas or where there are pockets of drug trafficking activity. So we have enormous challenges in facing all of these illegal and ill-intentioned groups. But what we saw last week, let me say, was not a simple, if there is a simple, terrorist attack. This was organized crime, dear friends. Be assured of that. Going to the jugular of our democracy, of our democracy, not just in Colombia, I say again, but to that of the hemisphere. And again, that's why I'm here, exhorting you to stand firm with us, to show your solidarity. And let us not forget, Chair, that on the 15th of July, by the way, there had been a previous coup attempt in that same brigade. Some may not know it, but the profile, the facts are identical virtually. And so let me reiterate yet again that every member of this organization must be aware how critical it is that we have in Resolution 1373 of the United Nations Security Council. Every one of those elements must be respected. there must be no safe haven anywhere in the world for terrorists. That is critical. And we believe that it is of the essence that we move forward to develop every possible strategy for us to face up to the drug traffickers, but most especially to be able to gird and buttress our regional cooperation. This is where we can best face up to the drug traffickers and all other illicit activities. It isn't enough for Colombia to do it. It is a moral and a legal imperative that we stop this from spreading like the cancer that it is, north, south, into the Caribbean, from there into North America. We know very well that the damage occasioned by drug trafficking is irreparable. In our country, we're also strengthening the quality of our armed services, the armed forces, the police, because they must be able to do their job as effectively as possible, with utter respect, certainly, for human rights. And believe me, we will stay on that, because we understand that democracy depends fundamentally on the credibility and on the legitimacy that our armed services and our police might have. This is not a minor point. It's right up there. And our president talks about it constantly. We talk about dissuasion, we talk about persuasion, but always respectful of human rights and ever attentive to them. So that is how our armed forces, our public defense forces in Colombia is in fact framed. And that through the entire legal system, the various prosecutors, anybody dealing with criminality, along with the armed forces, must understand that the necessary measures that are taken must be within the four corners of the law. And certainly when something is proven beyond a reasonable doubt, that there be the appropriate sanction. And if that must be meted out to one of the members of our armed forces or the police, so be it. There are no exceptions. This is without precedent. And so in a manner, we are facing a double challenge, do you see? We need to be sure that the response of Colombia be timely, be efficient, both. And let me thank all the members of the organization that have been with us since July 17th. Since June 17th, I beg your pardon. We are very, very grateful to you for your cooperation, knowing how much help we need. International cooperation has helped, for instance, the Syrian migration, but we in Colombia are doing our part so that the Venezuelans who are in such dire straits may also be received in full respect of their human rights. We're doing this also with regard to vaccinations, including everyone who needs to be protected so that everyone else is protected and can aspire to a decent living. That commitment to our Venezuelan brothers and sisters is absolutely unconditional. We understand and support the need to help. You know, the impact of the pandemic is felt by all. Losing our jobs, companies collapsing, the collapse into poverty, the fear. This is why we understand how legitimate it is that so many young people, however old they are out in the streets marching out of frustration and asking for their goals to be met. We understand those marches, but here again, protests must also abide by the limits set by international instruments and certainly those that mark our inter-American system. And from the 28th of April, as you well know, Colombia has been suffering a very atypical situation, totally unknown for us, because we saw in the midst of those protests something else emerging, something violent, something authoritarian. And this is something that goes way beyond graffiti or breaking windows. We're talking about something deeply violent from minority groups who have understood that this is a great chance for them to hop on the bandwagon and sow chaos everywhere. And that's exactly what they're doing. And so we need to be very sure that those who are protesting safely not be caught in the trample. Here was a young man going home from his work on a motorbike, and his head was cut off. We have had 14,075 protests of late, of which 12,016 have been peaceful. Alas, some more, some less, and some quite violent. About 1,600, if I'm not mistaken. About 1,600 have been riddled with violence, with vandalism. And those, of course, are the ones which naturally required the intervention of our armed forces. That's about 10%, by the way. 10% of those protests have, in fact, demanded the intervention of the armed forces. So let no one say here, oh my God, protests aren't allowed in Colombia. The police is involved at all times. No way. That is not the case. The police is there to buttress the public in the face of vandalism or criminality. And you know, ambassadors, this is what would occur in any civilized country, any part in the world. When you have violence perpetrated upon the public, naturally the armed forces and the public defense needs to be involved. But this has not been against freedom of expression. There have been great attacks on our infrastructure, on important sources of business and of employment. And so we're living, quite frankly, something similar to what Chile lived, to what Ecuador has lived. And by the way, ask not for whom the bell tolls. We're all in this. You can't say, oh, this will never happen in my country. Look again. We have to be prepared to use the best practices, to listen, to hone our potential for dialogue, and improve our public policies, particularly in terms of development. We need to be more timely and more effective. But what happened to Colombia virtually overnight, I say again, could happen to any of us anywhere in the hemisphere. And that is why we must, of course, stand firm, supporting peaceful demonstration, as our Inter-American Charter states. However, the Democratic Charter also states conclusively that where defense and national security are involved, the state must intervene. It is a duty to protect fellow citizens. And when you have minority, very violent groups infiltrating those peaceful groups, that cannot go unnoticed. More than 41,000 weapons have been found, war-grade, long rifles, and short, very percussive. You're talking about the entire array of weapons that we have found. And certainly then the authorities must act, because at that point, you understand, we're not talking about peaceful protests, far from it. And every state has the absolute duty to protect their peoples. But there is then a need to strike a balance.
Hacia un fortalecimiento.
This is the way we will be able to strengthen our democracy. We can never deny the rights of the demonstrators, but also we cannot deny the right to protection by other citizens. So we have to intervene to establish order, to guarantee adequate development. In Colombia, the National Police is a civil body that has a very demanding standards imposed upon it. I was Minister of Defense 18 years ago, and it's impressive how on a continuous basis they continue to adjust the rules to international standards, particularly in the use of force. When can it be used? What type of action can be taken? Remember that, for instance, in Colombia, the multitask police has multitask. We have protecting youth and children, protection of the environment, citizen safety in the streets, and also the combating of drug trafficking. That's why they have very specific protocols for each one of these areas of action, and in all, the respect of human rights is cross-cutting. It is a sine qua non requirement of the national police. Those events in which the public forces need to act will always be events where each one of the members of the institution clearly understands how they have to proceed according to those protocols, but also how they need to respond in case one of those protocols is violated, or they act in a violent way against a citizen or violate human rights. However, in spite of all of this institutional improvement, the president last year led a police reform. It was submitted to the Colombian Congress in November last year and was recently, it was accepted, and the president recently announced a series of reforms to continue improving the police. We will create an observatory of human rights within the national police, and I also want to point out something very important. In Colombia, the police is institutionally under the Ministry of Defense, but its doctrine, its organization is civil in structure. And obviously, they have a training that is completely separate and independent of the military training schools. I also want to say something that could occur in any one of your countries at any point in time. Within a protest, you could have traffic interruption, or certain limitations may be imposed on movement. But a different thing is the blockades that have been produced with the purpose of threatening the life of citizens. In Colombia, we have seen blockades that were perfectly well designed for the purpose of blocking not only certain cities, but also for affecting and harming the lives of Colombians. For instance, they blocked the exit road of the oxygen factory that was preparing tanks to send to the intensive care hospitals at the highest point of the pandemic in Colombia. They blockaded entire cities, impeding the entry of medication and food. So that's completely different. This is in the Colombian Criminal Code, Article 353 of our code. This is defined as a crime because it violates human life, public health, and the rights of all the citizens. So we will continue to defend the rights of the Colombian citizens and also the property of the Colombian citizens, the infrastructure, and also under freedom and the human rights, protecting the human rights of all citizens, because any violation of that clause on the correlation between rights and duties, which appears in Article 32 of the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights, which specifies that the rights of each person are limited by the rights of the others. And any violation of that principle would mean to disregard the very essence of human rights and the very essence of a democracy. As I said, we have had a minimum number of violent activities within these 14,000 demonstrations and protests we've seen, but also a significant amount of blockades, 3,500 blockades that have violated the rights to life, the personal dignity of all Colombian citizens, where there's been a seizure of a large number of weapons. And when you add up all the weapons taken, it's close to 70,000 weapons seized. So that shows us that there has been a specific intent of undermining the institutionality of the country, the peace of the citizens, and the life of the citizens, but also directly affecting the stability of our country. We've had a large number of persons injured, people from civil society or uniformed people, 1,500 civilians, 1,400 uniformed persons with serious wounds. And all of this is being researched by and investigated by the prosecutor's office to make sure that the law is applied. Now, you cannot imagine the economic impact this has had. You know that we were going to propose a tax reform that was the drop that overflowed the cup. This tax reform was for the purpose of increasing 24 billion pesos that were necessary to cover the social costs caused by the pandemic. And as of the 28th of April, in Colombia alone, more than 50% of what we were going to generate with that reform has been destroyed. 12 billion pesos have been lost by Colombia. That's $40 million. 1,700 private goods, 2,200 public goods, a destruction of the infrastructure, the public transportation system, other things that I've mentioned already. So, dear ambassadors, I want you to understand our full commitment to the respect to protest, but to point out there have been protest dates that are taken advantage of by minorities whose exact purpose is to cause upheaval, chaos, turmoil, weaken the institutions, and affect governance. In other words, destabilize our society. The government will continue to work in protecting the rights of Colombians. We have undertaken a lot of reforms in the last 3 years of government. Some have been accelerated recently. One of these reforms is to guarantee free enrollment for higher education students in stratas 1, 2, and 3, which is something that is extremely important, which we had been wanting to do for some time. It represents 50% of the youth will receive 100% coverage through a new tax reform that will have to be submitted without increasing the taxes of the middle class. Nothing of that type, but we have to do that kind of a reform in order to provide this level of education. We have also created a subsidy for employment for youth because they will receive 25% of the minimum salary so as to ensure that companies that hire them can pay for their Social Security without being a cost to the corporation. We've also created general benefits and subsidies for housing for youth, loans for new enterprises in rural areas. We've been working very hard in some dialogues to set up the National Council of Economic and Social Policy for Youth, which takes short, medium, and long-term goals. It'll create an agenda for the young in Colombia for the next 30 years, and this will lead to a series of decisions that will be made in this government. We've had a strike roundtable, which was used as a way of putting political pressure on the government. And the government of President Duque will continue to try to dialogue with them. But unfortunately and regrettably, some of the participants encouraged the strikes that harmed the country so much. And more importantly, we will continue to work with all our will in a mass vaccination program, reactivating the economy. We expect to have 35 million persons vaccinated by the second half of September. Part of the upheaval and of the people and that led to the protest was there was a lot of misinformation in the social networks. That's another issue that is a problem, and any country could suffer from this. They said that nobody will be vaccinated. It'll take 3 years for people to be vaccinated. And that, of course, creates upheaval. But our country had already bought the vaccines at the beginning of this year so that 70% of the population, which would be 35 million citizens, would be vaccinated by December of this year. But again, thanks to international cooperation, in fact, right now, wanting to be with the president when the donation from the United States of 200 million vaccines, and in the 2nd September, we're hoping to have all 35 million Colombians vaccinated so that we can continue speeding up vaccination in our country and to continue supporting vaccination in other countries. As you know, very recently we provided 1 million for vaccinating countries in the Caribbean because we realize what they are going through. I would like to conclude by reminding you that the Inter-American Commission was present in Colombia. When I visited Washington, I myself, with Ambassador Ordóñez, said, welcome to Colombia, but let's follow a logical course. You sent information to the prosecutor's office in Colombia, analyze the information before you speak to him, and that way you will be able to go to Colombia for a visit. At that time, they had a public hearing scheduled on the situation in Colombia for the 28th of May, for the 28th of June, rather. And I said, why don't you first go to Colombia, and after you get information and after the public hearing, in other words, on the 29th, 30th of June, whenever you wish. After that, the Commission took the decision to suspend the public hearing of the 29th of June, and that's why we were able to host the visit in early June of the Commission. It was done on the 7th, 8th, 9th of June. And that meeting with the President of the Republic and all the heads of the supervisory offices, the Attorney General, the Prosecutor's Office, the various ministers that are involved in this issue, met with him in presence to ensure the implementation of the peace agreement in Colombia. As you know, the peace agreement has been implemented with some outcomes much higher than had been expected at the time the peace agreement was implemented. So nobody can say that there's no commitment on the part of this government to implement the very comprehensive agreement, an agreement that is part of the Colombian Constitution. They also met with the advisor on human rights, and more important, the Commission saw that in Colombia there's a regulatory framework, there is citizen participation, there's pluralism, there's a guarantee of human rights, and respect for human rights is not just from one government. It's something that we've been working on for many years in Colombia. That's why, quite modestly, I'd like to remind you that Colombia has been a leader at the OAS in the area of human rights. I, for instance, when I was the Minister of Defense 18 years ago, I was the one that set up the first school of human rights within the military forces in Colombia. So this is a continuous of our state policy. And we all know that the threat to human rights has many factors behind it. And it's not just the state that can sometimes be a threat. Yes, the state is the one most responsible and the one that has to enforce them the most, and the one that must make sure, though, that there are other threats to human rights coming from other sectors. That's, I think, the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights was able to determine the institutional strength of Colombia, but even more important, that Colombia was open to their comments and to international support. Our participation in the Inter-American system is well known by you. We have carried out all international commitments we have made, and the commissioners saw that as well and acknowledged it at the various meetings we had with them. I'd also like to remind you that in these protests, in implementing the peace agreement in Colombia, we have 20 United Nations agencies present. The UN High Commissioner on Human Rights has an office in Colombia. So there is continuous monitoring of the human rights situation in our country. So all of that presence of international organizations in our country. There's also the UN Verification Committee. They provide quarterly reports to the Security Council of the UN. There is a mission to support the peace process by the OAS. All of those have been very helpful and valuable to Colombia. And I think this can guarantee to you that there's not only institutional commitment on the part of the state and the government, but that the openness we had at the meeting with the Commission is a demonstration of our ethical duty and commitment to create greater confidence and credibility in the Colombian institutions, because it is on these institutions that our democracy depends. We never want to have Colombia's democracy be threatened, which we have seen, unfortunately, in other democracies. We don't want to see the breakdown and deterioration that we see as in Venezuela. And finally, I'd like to reiterate that we have a major challenge, which with our commitment to listen to the population, work with them, work honestly, try to attain a more efficient and transparent state, this awareness that we all have of protecting the most vulnerable is something that we do every day. I work every day to ensure that there's more inclusion, that women, that the informal population are explicitly covered by our public policies, because we want to create jobs that will dignify their standard of living. We want to make sure that the social assistance programs is not just limited to the oldest and poorest, but also for all by creating jobs, because that is what will improve their lives. There's nothing that would justify having minority groups destroy what we have built with so much hard work in Colombia and in each one of our countries over the past few years. I'd like to thank all of you for this opportunity to discuss these relevant issues and to describe the situation in Colombia, and I particularly thank you for the support of the OAS, the Inter-American Human Rights System. I also would like to thank the visit made by Héctor Chamiz, representing the Secretary General Luis Almagro, and we are very aware of all the support that many donor countries have made to us, to support us in this decision to continue in a generous and comprehensive manner accepting the Venezuelan migrants, because we believe that's a way of moving forward and developing our country in a way that all citizens are benefited through solidarity, through growth, and through awareness of this great opportunity given to us by life, this solidarity that we need to have for the families who have lost dear ones, and particularly the continuous work of support that we need to provide one another to make sure that the pandemic, as well as the health problems and any climate change risks, will not continue to generate deaths in the absurd numbers that we have seen in the last year and a half. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General, and particularly thank you to our good friend, the President of the Permanent Council in Washington, Mr. Adala, Ambassador Alejandro Ordóñez, and all of you, dear ambassadors, for this opportunity you have given me, and also Assistant Secretary General, Dr. Nestor Menendez, and our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Adriana Mejia, who's well known here and who has worked very hard in the area of human rights, Dr. Mirza, our Director of Human Rights at the Foreign Affairs Office, Juanita Lopez, the Vice Minister of Justice in Colombia, all of whom have been following what's going on in Colombia. Do you hear the airplane in the background? It's very difficult for me to speak, but it's landing with the vaccines that we need. So thank you so much. I hope we have the opportunity to see one another in person in Washington. Again, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing with this council the very valuable and helpful information you've given us. Ambassador Jonas is here. You have a fabulous representative here whom we admire. On behalf of the Permanent Council, I'd like to thank you so much for the time you have allocated to us, and I'd like to remind the delegations that this meeting will be recorded in the minutes, and you are free because we know you have a very tight agenda. Goodbye. Thank you so much. There's nothing else. The meeting's adjourned. The meeting is adjourned.